In the winter of 1858, in the fog-veiled countryside of northern Georgia, a photograph was taken that would become one of the most haunting relics of the 19th century. It was meant to be a tender farewell, a memento of loss. Yet decades later, it would reveal a horror so profound that it reshaped our understanding of Victorian medicine and the fragile line between life and death. This is the story of the Prescott brothers. On November 14, 1858, the Prescott household in the quiet town of Ashburn awoke to an unsettling silence. 16-year-old Thomas Prescott, a bright and hard-working apprentice at the local printing press, had failed to rise at his usual hour. His younger brother Samuel, only 9 years old, assumed Thomas had overslept after days of overwork. Their widowed mother, Margaret Prescott, a woman whose health had been fragile since her husband's death 3 years earlier, was too ill to notice her eldest son's unusual stillness upstairs. By midday, when Thomas had not appeared for lunch, Samuel climbed the narrow staircase to his brother's room, a small chamber overlooking the gray fields. The door was half open. Inside, Thomas lay perfectly still upon his bed, one hand resting across his chest, his face peaceful, almost smiling. Thinking his brother had dozed off, Samuel called his name softly, then shook his shoulder. But the boy did not wake. The town physician, Dr. Arthur Leland, was summoned from his practice on Main Street. Dr. Leland, a cautious man educated in Edinburgh, had served the Prescotts for years. After a brief examination, a mirror over the lips, fingers to the wrist, an ear pressed against the chest, he declared what no mother wishes to hear. Thomas Prescott was dead. There were no signs of illness or injury. His skin, though pale, retained a peculiar warmth, and the pupils were slightly contracted, details Leland dismissed as the residual effects of vitality. His notes from that day, later found among his papers, read simply, "Sudden cessation of heart, likely natural. No trauma. Recommend burial within 2 days." For the grieving Prescotts, this was another cruel blow from fate. Margaret Prescott had already buried her husband after a mill accident in 1855. Now her eldest son, the only one who kept the family afloat, was gone without explanation. In those years, it was not uncommon for families to commission photographs of their dead. These images, known as memento mori, were cherished keepsakes, one last chance to preserve a loved one's likeness. The town photographer, Mr. Elias Whitcomb, a friend of the Prescotts and an expert in the new collodion process, offered to capture a final image of young Thomas. On the morning of November 15th, Whitcomb arrived at the Prescott home with his heavy brass camera and glass plates. The boy's body had been washed and dressed in his best dark coat. Whitcomb arranged him in the parlor, seated upright in a velvet chair near the window, so that daylight could illuminate the features. Beside him, Samuel was posed with one small hand resting gently on his brother's shoulder. The exposure required several minutes. Whitcomb later recorded in his diary, "The subject's complexion appeared uncommonly flushed for one deceased 24 hours. I attributed it to the freshness of the body." The photograph, once developed, showed 2 brothers, one living, one seemingly asleep, captured in an eternal moment of farewell. No one could have imagined that this image would, decades later, be studied not as a token of grief, but as evidence of one of the most chilling medical oversights in history. The burial took place the next afternoon in Ashburn Cemetery under the swaying pines that bordered the river. The coffin, built of sturdy oak, was lowered into the ground amid tears and hymns. Samuel clung to his mother's dress, unable to comprehend the finality of what he was witnessing. Life went on, but for the Prescotts, it was never the same. Margaret withdrew into near silence, leaving Samuel to be raised largely by kind neighbors and the family's church pastor. The photograph of Thomas, framed in polished walnut, became a sacred relic in the household. Visitors recalled that Margaret would sometimes sit before it for hours, whispering to the image as if expecting an answer. Years passed. Samuel grew up, married, and inherited his mother's few possessions after her death in 1898. Among them was the photograph, by then slightly faded, the glass cracked at one corner, still hanging above the parlor fireplace. It might have remained an obscure family relic, if not for what happened 20 years later. In 1919, as the town expanded and the cemetery was partially relocated to make space for a new railway line, several graves were exhumed under the supervision of Dr. Henry Collier, a forensic specialist sent from Atlanta to oversee the reburials. Among the coffins brought to the surface was that of Thomas Prescott, buried 61 years earlier. Dr. Collier's assistants noted at once that the oak coffin was unusually well preserved, but when they removed the lid, what they found inside defied belief. The skeleton was not lying in the calm, orderly position of the dead. Instead, it had twisted violently to one side, the arms bent upward, fingers extended toward the lid. Deep gouges scored the inner surface of the coffin's top, scratches unmistakably made by human nails. Several finger bones were broken, and splinters of wood were still embedded within them. Dr. Collier's report, preserved in the Georgia Historical Medical Archives, describes clear signs of struggle after interment, and notes fractures to the rib cage consistent with powerful convulsions. In a quiet but chilling tone, he concluded, "Subject appears to have been interred in a state of apparent death rather than true cessation of life." The evidence pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Thomas Prescott had been buried alive. Further analysis confirmed what later generations of doctors would call cataleptic trance, a rare neurological condition in which the body becomes rigid, breath slows to near imperceptibility, and all outward signs of life vanish. In 1858, such conditions were scarcely understood. Even skilled physicians could mistake them for death. When Dr. Leland was informed of Collier's discovery, he was still alive, though elderly and nearly blind. He wept openly, insisting he had done everything known to medicine at the time. "We had no instruments," he reportedly said, "only eyes and ears, and faith." The rediscovery of Thomas Prescott's body sparked widespread fascination. Newspapers across Georgia carried lurid headlines: "Boy Buried Alive, Shocking Exhumation in Ashburn." The photograph resurfaced, reproduced in articles that debated whether the boy's half-closed eyes and faint color might have betrayed signs of lingering life. Modern photographic analysts, when examining the surviving plate, pointed out subtle details unnoticed in 1858. Faint tension around the jawline, slight asymmetry in the lips, and the faintest reflection of moisture at the inner corner of one eye. Impossible, some said, for a true corpse. Elias Whitcomb's original notebook, discovered in a local archive, contained a line that now reads like an omen. "The younger brother appeared, unsettled throughout the sitting, as if fearing movement from the elder." Such sensations were not unique. In later years, Samuel often spoke, quietly to his own children, of a night shortly after the funeral when he dreamt of hearing faint tapping sounds from beneath the ground near the cemetery. The family dismissed it as the torment of grief, yet the dream haunted him for the rest of his life. The Prescott photograph became the centerpiece of academic lectures on premature burial, cited alongside European cases of cataleptic misdiagnosis. Forensic pathologists demonstrated how, without stethoscopes or mechanical instruments, even experienced doctors could fail to detect life in patients whose breathing had fallen below perception. Dr. Collier's analysis of the Prescott remains revealed that Thomas likely regained consciousness several hours after burial. The position of the hands and fractured phalanges suggested a prolonged struggle lasting perhaps half an hour before asphyxiation took hold. Experts estimated he survived between 2 and 4 hours underground. It is a thought almost unbearable to imagine. The boy waking in absolute darkness, confined within a wooden box, clawing against the lid as oxygen dwindled. Every scratch mark became a silent testimony to a human mind fully aware of its imprisonment. Following the revelation, medical journals across the United States published renewed discussions about the apparent death phenomenon. Some hospitals began implementing extended observation periods before declaring death, a practice that would eventually evolve into the modern 24-hour rule for suspicious cases. Ironically, it was said that the Prescott case influenced the design of the Bateson patent safety coffin, manufactured in London around 1860, a device equipped with air tubes and a bell system meant to signal the living should they awaken underground. Though few such coffins were ever used in America, the idea reflected the same terror the Prescotts unknowingly lived. Samuel Prescott died in 1922 at the age of 73. Among his few belongings, his descendants found the faded photograph, wrapped carefully in linen. On the back, in his trembling handwriting, he had written, "My brother's eyes were not closed." Today, the image of the Prescott brothers is preserved in the archives of the Georgia State Museum of Medical History. Visitors who study the photograph often remark on how serene it appears. Two brothers joined in silence. But for those who know the story, that silence carries an unspoken scream. The Prescott tragedy remains a symbol of both scientific progress and human fallibility. It reminds us that medicine, even when practiced with care, is bound by the limits of its time, and that the distance between life and death can be thinner than we dare believe. Historians and neurologists continue to analyze the case. Some argue that Thomas may have suffered from catatonic seizure or narcoleptic coma rather than true catalepsy. Others speculate that environmental factors, the cool Georgian winter air, the swift burial, slowed bodily decay, preserving the illusion of vitality long enough to mislead Dr. Leland. But no explanation can fully erase the horror of what happened in that coffin. To this day, a memorial plaque in Ashburn Cemetery bears Thomas Prescott's name. Beneath it, in faint engraving added decades later, are the words, "May those who rest truly rest." The photograph, meanwhile, continues to inspire both scholars and artists. It has been displayed in exhibitions about Victorian mourning customs, forensic medicine, and the evolution of human understanding. Some call it one of the most haunting images ever produced, not for what it shows, but for what it hides. When you look closely, beyond the stillness and the sentiment, you might feel as though Thomas's eyes follow you, as though the image itself remembers. For over a century and a half, the Prescott brothers' story has endured as a reminder of the fragile threshold separating the living from the dead, of human error, and of the tragedies that quietly shaped modern science. It is, in every sense, a photograph that outlived its own subject, a silent witness to the terror of awakening in one's own grave. So next time you see a faded Victorian portrait with its strange calm and fixed expressions, remember this story. Behind every still face, there may linger a question the camera could never answer. Was this truly death, or something far more horrifying? And if this tale has stirred your fascination with the dark corners of medical history, with the forgotten stories that blur the line between life and death, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we uncover more mysteries buried in the past. Because sometimes, history's quietest photographs hide the loudest screams.